sensitivity before members trotted out anti-Semitic tropes, and you would also think the party would want to immediately avoid the pitfalls that Republicans have unfortunately victimized themselves with on all of these anti-Muslim tropes and anti-Jewish tropes, and get out there and make a strong statement condemning this sort of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think because of the pattern of comments from Congresswoman Omar, it's not that hard to say we have to put a stop to this. We have to put a resolution together that condemns anti-Semitism when you've seen the pattern. And I also think there's an element. Congresswoman Omar is a smart, accomplished 38-year-old, I believe, woman who's sort of being infantilized and surrounded by, the members of Congress as she moves through the halls so that the press won't talk to her. She knows she's a smart woman. She knows what she's doing. She knows what she's saying, and she ought to be able to answer questions about it. And Eugene, you are writing about this morning. It seems to me there's an awful lot of whataboutism coming out of the Democratic side. Well, what about the poster in West Virginia that showed a picture of Congresswoman Omar in front of the burning towers on 9/11, connecting her to that? That was horrible and should be condemned, of course. Well, what about the President of the United States taking the side of white nationalists during a riot that killed a young woman in Charlottesville, Virginia? As we've said a million times, that was horrible and ought to be condemned. Why is it so hard to step out and say this kind of language, which most people agree is anti-Semitic, should be condemned in a resolution? Why is that so difficult for Nancy Pelosi and her party right now?
I think the challenge that Democratic leaders are having right now is that they have seen data and surveys showing that significant groups within the Democratic Party, or at least the left, actually do have some concerns about America's foreign policy with Israel. There was a poll this fall, YouGov and The Economist, that showed that several voting blocs affiliated historically with the Democratic Party actually have been increasingly critical of Israel and have expressed some concern about the relationship between America's government and the Israeli government, including women and millennials, working class voters, and people of color. And so there really is a desire to somehow find a way to get this concern in the conversation and at the table in a way that does not disrespect Jewish Americans. And they're having a hard time finding ways to balance all of these interests. We know the Democratic Party is a group that, for the most part, is made up of different interest groups, and they want to find a way to get all of those voices at the table. And even yesterday, in some of my reporting, I haven't found what Chait's column found. We still know that more than 70% of Jewish Americans backed the Democratic Party in 2016. And while some have expressed concerns about Representative Omar's comments, quite a few organizations have actually come out and supported her, and Jewish activists saying that these smears on her are that, in fact, and just a distraction from those on the right. And so there doesn't seem to be consensus, even within the Jewish community, that the way the Democratic leadership is responding to Representative Omar is appropriate.
Though, Sam, it does seem pretty basic. And if anybody that runs a Jewish organization that says if you're supportive of Israel, as I have been my entire political career and in my life, that you somehow can't, you've got dual loyalties, is every bit as offensive as saying that I can't believe that the United States and Great Britain has a special relationship without having dual loyalties there. There is an anti-Semitic undertone to that argument. And I don't know why. I mean, if Democrats aren't skillful enough to attack Benjamin Netanyahu and attack his policies without saying any Jew or any Gentile that supports Israel has dual loyalties, well, then they don't deserve to be in the majority. I mean, that's just absolute nonsense.
Yeah, no. It's obviously a very tricky issue, and it's been difficult to engage in from a reporting standpoint and even a commentary standpoint. I do think you're right. There is obviously a long-standing anti-Semitic trope about dual loyalties, and whether she intentionally did it or not, she played on that. And for a lot of American Jews, that has been offensive, and it's been disheartening to watch the difficulty that politicians have had dealing with that. But where I do think the conversation gets a little lost is with what Eugene talked about, which is Representative Omar may not quite understand just how much Jewish liberals are with her in terms of their distrust or their skepticism with U.S. policy towards Israel. That may not be resonating to the degree that she understands that there isn't this dual loyalty, that there are people who are yearning for an alternate approach to U.S.-Israel relations and the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and of course our allegiance, our seeming allegiance to the Netanyahu government. Mm-hmm. And I do think, finally, this is not whataboutism, although it's going to come off that way. But there is and has to be a better understanding of the degree to which anti-Muslim behavior isn't just rhetorical, but it permeates our politics in ways that people don't totally appreciate. So you mentioned that there's condemnation for anti-Muslim sentiment and remarks, and that is true. But we have to step back and realize that a huge policy that Donald Trump implemented was literally called a Muslim ban. Mm-hmm. And he pushed it and made it into law, and it went through the Supreme Court.
Sam,
and was,
we understand that.
And you've condemned it.
But
half
I'm
of the
saying,
country
though,
has
everybody's
embraced
talked
it.
about that.
Yes,
Everybody's talked about that in the media. The Democrats have talked about it.
Half of the country literally embraced it, and the Supreme Court certified its legality. And so I think for a lot of people, there is not an equivalency here. I think they look at this and they say...
I got to stop you there. The Supreme Court, the Supreme Court did not actually endorse a, quote, Muslim ban. In fact, those, quote, Muslim bans were overturned twice. It was only when the ban was made faith neutral that the Supreme Court allowed it to be passed.
Right. The origins of the ban was
overturned
a Muslim ban.
repeatedly.
Okay.
What's that?
Yeah, okay. Let's say that, yes, you're right about that. But still, you can acknowledge that a political party led by the now president rallied around a literal ban of Muslims. And I don't think that you can actually create an equivalency between what does
that have to do with a Democrat, a freshman Democrat, continuing to engage in anti-Semitic tropes? I mean, by my way of thinking, the Democrats would want to follow Michelle Obama's advice: when they go low, we go high, and actually show Americans there is a difference between Republicans and Democrats.
No, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that at all. What I'm trying to say is that the degree to which we've internalized anti-Muslim bigotry, because it now can take the form of actual legislation that a party endorses. Well, it's law. Or it created a law, basically.
But Sam, we have not embraced anti-Muslim bigotry. In fact, it is called out every day. I would suggest it's one of the reasons why Democrats won, because of Donald Trump's misogyny, because of Donald Trump, because of Charlottesville and his attitude towards non-white Americans, because of his attitude towards Hispanics, calling them breeders, because of his hatefulness towards Muslims, whether it was a Muslim ban or the Muslim registry, or what he did to a Gold Star family because the American hero happened to be a Muslim. I don't know. Maybe, Willie, I'm missing something here, but it just doesn't. This is not hard. This is not hard. You can uphold the values of the Democratic Party. You can condemn not only anti-Muslim behavior, but anti-Semitic behavior in Republicans. Like, again, just this past week, Jim Jordan. Yes, that same Jim Jordan put a $sign for an S in Tom Steyer's name. Why? Because he's Jewish. The same thing with Kevin McCarthy, who brought up 3 Jews and said, look at these Jews, basically, in a tweet. Look at these Jews with their Jewish money trying to buy a Democratic majority. I mean, it is out there, and it needs to be condemned, whether it's from the right wing, the left wing, or people in the middle. Yeah. This is not hard, is it?
Well, it is hard. If you look at that meeting that Politico reports on this morning, where there was some back and forth between Nancy Pelosi and the freshman members of her caucus, and they walked out of there without a resolution, delaying the vote on it because Nancy Pelosi doesn't believe they've settled the matter. It seems to a lot of us like it ought to be an easy thing to do, and as I said, as we have on this show, if you can condemn Donald Trump rightly for for the things he said after Charlottesville, if you can condemn that disgusting poster that was inside the West Virginia State House that showed Congresswoman Omar in front of the burning Twin Towers, then you can condemn anti-Semitism when you see it.
Yeah, I want to get back to Sam on this. So, Sam, hold that thought. We will get back to you. Just sort of, and bottom line here, a trope is a trope is a trope, and you got to learn when you might have mistakenly said it. We'll get back to you on this and continue this conversation, but we need to get to this next story and our next guest. In a